So and then just make sure to go live in Facebook because we'll have some viewers who are just going from Facebook rather than Zoom. And then Bryce is streaming to a Discord channel as well, so we'll have that as well. And I think we'll start in around 5 minutes just to give everyone some time to log on to the Zoom. How's your day going, Rachel?
Good.
You're in DC right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty hectic right now with
Yeah. Fortunately, I don't live on that side of town, so I'm pretty far from where most of the action is taking place. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting time.
Yeah, I remember from when I was there, I joined like the subreddit for DC, and like the last week it was just like very wild, just to see what was happening. And I was like, my mentor was like in the area, like from the
Oh
start,
no.
and I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, so he was like hiding in this house the whole time. It was like,
yeah,
the whole thing was very wild.
I know that some folks on Capitol Hill, not like in the Capitol, but folks who live in that neighborhood were evacuated from their homes.
Yeah, I used the place where I used to work was like HHS is like right near Capitol Hill.
Yeah, it's pretty close.
So I'm just like thinking, also, I wanted to quickly clarify some things before we really get into it. The fellowship app is already open. When does it close?
January 24th.
24th. Okay, so we have a couple weeks.
Yeah, almost 2 weeks.
Okay, cool. And then for those of you just coming in, we'll spend some time talking a little bit about what the fellowship is, and I guess we'll try to take some Q&A if you have any questions about what the fellowship is. For those of you who are streaming through Bryce's screen on Discord, or those of you who are on Facebook, if you want to ask questions, message in the Zoom chat, just join the Zoom chat or join the Innovate Discord, and then we can kind of post questions there. My team here is going to be checking all channels for questions and all that during the event, and I'll try to just incorporate questions during the thing. But yeah, we kind of have like a little bit of questions, and then we'll just sprinkle them in as they make sense. Cool. See, we're getting some more attendees. Cool. All right. Start in a couple minutes. Oh yeah, and make sure if you're here from ACM, you want to get points, just make sure to check in with the membership portal. I think it's like 5 or 10 points. That's always exciting. Cool. All right. All right, okay, cool. I think I'm gonna start. So welcome everyone to ACM Innovate. We're right now gonna be having a great talk with Rachel Dodell. So I'm gonna first start off by explaining what ACM Innovate is. So for those of you who don't know, ACM is the world's largest computing society, and the ACM chapter at UCSD is the largest engineering student organization on campus. Innovate's mission is to inspire innovation and entrepreneurship on every level, and to bring together like-minded individuals. For today's talk, we're really delighted to be joined by Rachel Dodell. So Rachel is the co-founder and executive director of Coding It Forward. She played an active role in Coding It Forward's growth and oversees their day-to-day operations, strategy, and communications, and a lot more. Prior to Coding It Forward, she graduated with honors from Wellesley College and was a Venture for America Fellow. Welcome, Rachel. Really great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk with all of you.
So I think we're just going to start off by just talking about what is civic tech. So we kind of throw this term around a lot. Coding It Forward kind of seems a little bit weird for those of us who are kind of looking at Google and Facebook. So what exactly is civic technology?
Yeah, that's a really great question. There's lots of different ways that folks define it, and I do not by any means claim to have the singular definition. Civic technology, also sometimes referred to as public interest technology, I personally view it as technical development and services in service of governments and other civic institutions. So that might not necessarily look like the federal government, but perhaps a city or local institution as well. And I think sometimes folks also kind of lump in some other social services that aren't necessarily directly in the government, but also very much related.
Gotcha. I was kind of curious, how did you kind of get into civic technology and how did you discover it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I was in high school, I was really involved in my local and state government. Big surprise. I did a lot of work with my mayor's youth council, and then my governor also had something called the Governor's Youth Commission at the time. And so I was serving on both of those. Thought I was actually going to go to college and pursue a degree in political science. And it wasn't actually until I got to college that I was really excited by the prospect of studying computing. So my college offered a degree called Media Arts and Sciences. It's a combination of computer science, design, art, and the digital humanities. So it kind of gives you a broad overview of not only how to become a technologist, but also a lot of the social science implications of technology. And you really get to learn about the field and the industry from an interdisciplinary perspective. And that was really interesting to me because I knew I didn't just want to, be coding all day. I was really interested in kind of the implications of technology. And so my first semester, like the good college student that I was looking to knock out a gen ed requirement, and computer science happened to knock out the mathematics one. And I'd always been interested in technology my whole life. I mean, we're of the generation that kind of grew up from, having pretty much no technology or personal computing to really having that opportunity to be the first generation to get to use those things in school, to have them for personal gaming, to listen to music. I remember the days before iPods were a thing. So I'd always grown up with that interest and seeing the world changing around me. And then I got to college and thought, okay, there's this political science side of me who enjoys government work, but I'm not really sure that I want to be writing policy papers or pursuing that field. It wasn't really of interest to me. Where the interest was the actual governance and the service and of people and being able to help folks. And so I thought, okay, how can I do this? How can I combine these two skills? At the time, organizations like the US Digital Service, where Eddie's from, or Eddie, who spoke a few weeks ago with you all, it currently works, was just starting. So USDS is an entirely new concept. I was following that really closely in the news, but unfortunately, they weren't hiring entry level folks. So I ended up returning back to my hometown. I'm from Arizona, worked at a digital services firm there that worked in a lot of local and state campaigns. So I got to help build a website for Arizona's largest foster care system. I got to help work on a historically groundbreaking campaign for public transit, passing a multi-billion-dollar bill to help bring more public transportation options to the city of Phoenix. And I thought that was really amazing and wanted to do it on a larger scale. So the following summer, I came to Washington, D.C. I worked at a firm doing national and gubernatorial campaigns. So to help elect state governors, as well as a lot of national bills that folks wanted passed. Then 2016 happened, and we all know what the outcome of that election was. And I, at the time, was just kind of getting burnt out on the cycle of politics. It's really emotionally driven, particularly when you do it for work. You spend a lot of hours reading the news, figuring out what's going on, trying to get people elected. It can be a really kind of up and down cycle, and kind of wanted to pivot my interest. So I wanted to get back to kind of, my main goal of serving folks. So fortunately enough, some other people who were similarly minded, some of my friends, Chris Kwong, who's my co-founder, but also Athena Khan and Neil Mehta, were over at Harvard, which is not too far from where I went to school, and we're working on starting coding it forward. So it just all kind of aligned at the time, and was fortunate enough to be part of our first cohort.
So what is Coding It Forward exactly? Is it the fellow? Because I see there's a fellowship and there's like First Act Fund. So what exactly is Coding It Forward and what's its mission?
Yeah, so we're a nonprofit organization. We were started back in 2017. Originally, it's just a Facebook group and newsletter for folks like us who were interested in becoming involved in social impact technology, but had no idea how to do that. Now, our current mission is to create more opportunities and pathways for young technologists to enter both civic and social impact technology. And what that means is we're trying to build the opportunities that don't currently exist, the internship opportunities, the funding opportunities, the entry level job opportunities that are not currently exhibited in this industry. So yes, in addition to the fellowship, which is definitely one of our flagship programs, we offer a few other initiatives as well, including the First Act Fund, which is a grant and funding opportunity where we give out small grants around $5,000 to $10,000 to young technologists from anywhere in the world to pursue social impact projects, as long as they're technically related and have a really unique and novel approach to what they're trying to solve. And then we also recently worked with Schmidt Futures and the Federation of American Scientists to launch the Impact Fellowship, which is a 1-year-long fellowship program for postgrads. So folks who are recently graduated from undergrad or grad school to work embedded in a nonprofit or social impact organization for a year as part of their tech team. So we're continuing to expand, trying to figure out ways we can be of service to young technologists who are interested in pursuing this field.
I wanted to touch a little bit more on the First Act Fund. So Innovate is about, ACM Innovate is about entrepreneurship and about starting things. One of the things we get asked a lot, especially about civic tech, is why would you kind of get into civic technology? And like from an investment perspective, how do you because with a VC firm, they put in some money and they expect to get like 10x or 100x out of it. But obviously with coding it, with civic tech or this First Act Fund, you're not necessarily getting a monetary outcome out of it. So I guess my questions are, one, why would you kind of go down this path? And two, if you're not optimizing for profit, what are you optimizing for? What's your metric in that sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we were fortunate enough to be working with Schmidt Futures on the First Act Fund. So with their monetary support, we were fortunate enough to be able to give out $200,000 in grants for our first few years of doing the First Act Fund. And the main reason behind that, I think, is to really see what's possible when you catalyze young technologists. We recognize that there's not a lot of funding opportunities out there for people currently in college. You say, hey, I have this great hardware solution, but I'm going to need $5,000 to go buy the tools and resources necessary to scaling it. And so that's a really small investment when it comes to the grand scheme of things, right? When you talk about VC, you're talking about millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So $5,000, while it might seem like a small amount in the grand scheme of things, that's enough to get a lot of these projects kind of off the ground. Coding It Forward, we started with $10,000 to our name, and we're able to scale it to the organization we are today. So that was the original impetus, is seeing what young people are capable of. And then based on kind of that initial catalytic funding, can we then bring on VC funders? Can we then bring on bigger grants? Can we then get them, the further resources they need for sustainability? And a lot of our teams have been super successful in doing that and raising additional funds and finding partnerships that are worth millions of dollars. So they've had a lot of great success, but just needed that initial belief and that initial funding to get off the ground.
Awesome. So you mentioned Schmidt Futures, and if you go to your website, you see you have a lot of really impressive funding sources. One of the things a lot of entrepreneurs kind of face is finding funding. So I was curious, how did you kind of go about finding these funding sources? And Schmidt Futures, for those of you who don't know, started by Eric Schmidt, the guy who's CEO of Google, very famous, very rich guy. And I was curious, how did you kind of get this? And then how do you balance all the funding you get with the mission you have? You're backed by Schmidt Futures, Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and a lot of other crazy cool organizations and companies. How do you balance what they are expecting to get out of the money and the overall mission of Coding It Forward?
Yeah, for sure. So We are really fortunate to have a lot of great funders. Fortunately, a lot of the ones that come out of Silicon Valley or from the technology industry are completely separate from their kind of parent companies, or perhaps where they originally made their money to be able to start philanthropies. So their missions are quite a bit different, and they're independent from the overall tech industry, which might kind of seem at odds originally with our mission, right? As you mentioned. So that independence and kind of their goals are definitely different. In terms of being able to get funding from these organizations, a lot of it is networking, and also kind of proof of concept. So in terms of how we got connected to these folks, perhaps there are individuals who were in the civic tech space formerly and then joined these organizations as grant officers, or to help continue kind of those teams' missions that we were connected to, and kind of pitched on our ideas. LinkedIn's a really great resource. I think it's underutilized in a kind of successful way. You shouldn't obviously be cold messaging every person you come across, but if you're really strategic about people who are aligned with your goals and your overall missions, it can be a really great tool to give, to ask people for 15-20 minutes of their time to chat. More often than not, since you're a student, people will be willing to do so. So I definitely say play the student card. That was a big factor in helping us get connected to people. People are always willing to help others learn and to be successful. And so, being a student, I think, is a really big door opener. I'd say also start locally. Your university probably has a lot of grants and other initiatives that you're not even aware of. Looking into entrepreneurship opportunities on campus and finding those small funding sources can really add up too. So one of our initial grants that got us to the $10,000 was a grant from Harvard, where some of the co-founders went, and that was a $5,000 grant that we won from a competition there. And so even though that doesn't seem like a lot of money at the time, it adds up, right? It was enough to get us going and to buy a domain and to get a website and all those sorts of things that we needed in the get-go. So there's lots of ways to get started. It's not necessarily about shooting for the moon from day one. It's a constant process for us to bring on new funders and to continue seeking out diverse sources of funding. But definitely start small, start local. Look within your state. Even sometimes your city or your state might have entrepreneurship resources as well, where they give out grants for businesses starting in your local city or state. So there's lots of ways to find funding. I think don't just think there's one source is kind of my advice.
I also want to really re-emphasize the student card. Myself, I remember when I was in government, I got a lot of experience, and just the amount of people who are willing to just kind of give you advice when you ask them for questions. Like part of what I did in coding it forward is I went from working for HHS to working for the US Digital Service. And a lot of that was just because I would cold message people on LinkedIn and ask them, how did you get your job? And especially when you're a student, people are like, we'll tell you whatever you want, because they're just flattered that someone's asking them. And you can kind of go from there. And I found some great mentors from that process. I just want to doubly emphasize on that. So I also want to kind of ask another big question. So in a world where Facebook has, I think, 2 billion users, Instagram has 1 billion users, and tech companies have this massive, massive scale, why would someone want to kind of go to the government where it's not impacting 1 billion people like the same way Facebook is? And like, I guess you probably are paid more in Facebook, you have more benefits. What drives you to kind of stay in civic tech, and why should you stay? Why should you not necessarily stay, but why should you go there when you have these other potentially more lucrative options?
Yeah, for sure. I think those are all great questions. So first, I think in terms of talking about the scale of impact, the government, if you thought about it as a private sector business, which it's not, but if you thought about it on the same scale, would be one of the largest, if not the largest business in the United States, just in terms of number of employees, the amount of revenue it deals with, the amount of scale and the impact it has in our everyday lives. It's kind of unparalleled besides the Facebooks and the Googles of the world. The United States government is serving hundreds of millions of Americans every single day. So definitely impact at scale is a huge part of that. Second, I'd say in terms of what you're actually going to build in government versus perhaps going to work at Facebook are two very different things. Going to work in government as a software engineer or data scientist, or product manager or designer or whatever it might be, you're going to have a lot more responsibilities in terms of what you're building and what you're trying to accomplish than perhaps another junior level software engineer going to Facebook when there's literally thousands of you employed by the company, across the board. You might be working on one really small feature that a user of Facebook is not even going to notice, frankly. So, or you're trying to make Google 1/100th of a millisecond faster, or, something that at the end of the day, sure, great. I love fast internet. I love when I get to my websites quickly, but do I as a person recognize 1/100th millisecond load times? No. So that scale and that impact, I think aren't even really comparable when you kind of look at the two opportunities, because the types of work that you get to do in government, when you look at a USDS, when you look at even what our Coding It Forward fellows have been able to accomplish, I think it's just a really different type of work that people are entrusted with. And I think from the financial perspective, there's actually a lot of great benefits to working with government. Public loan forgiveness, got student loans, that's a big perk of federal service.
Can you talk more about that, what the student loan thing?
Yeah, there's a public service loan forgiveness program. Granted, it has not been super successful in the past few years, but my understanding is that the new administration is hoping to re-up that program and get more folks involved in it. But essentially, after a certain amount of service, whether that's in government or a nonprofit organization, certain federal loans can be canceled or forgiven. So
that's awesome.
That's pretty amazing. There's a lot of people with student debt, and I know that can go a long way for folks. Other benefits, there's things like seeing in the chat, cancel, forgive federal loans. I feel like that's probably a hot topic amongst college students and even someone like myself who's a recent graduate. There's other benefits like long-term for working with government as well. There's also decent salaries. People forget that going to work in Silicon Valley for 120K looks great on paper. The actual living wage of 120K in Silicon Valley does not go as far as you think it might, just because the cost of living there is extraordinarily high. So I think it's all about perspective and thinking about those sorts of things and what other benefits your work might involve, just beyond kind of your paycheck.
You mentioned another thing I want to kind of go as you talk about the types of work. Can you give some examples that people have done in government, whether it's like been past fellows or people in USDS or something else like that?
Yeah, for sure. I can give a few examples of our past fellows. So one example that always sticks out to me is a fellow named Christian. He's actually still working at the Census Bureau today, but he was part of our cohort back in 2018. So it's been a few years, but when he was a fellow, as I mentioned, he was working at the Census Bureau on a project dedicated to machine learning, and in particular, trying to figure out kind of an audit of survey responses for a particular survey that the census was doing. And before, people were going in and checking what are known as NAICS codes, or codes where businesses are kind of categorized by industry. People before were going in and checking by hand that these codes were accurate for the surveys. And that's obviously a super inefficient process, takes a lot of time, and also is not something you need a person to do, frankly. So Christian's project focused on creating a machine learning algorithm that essentially checked these surveys that were submitted, checked the categorization of the code to make sure that they were correct for the industry that that business was in, or helped recategorize it depending on whatever the information was. And he estimated that in terms of human hours that would have normally been spent, he saved something like $2 million in taxpayer funding by kind of eradicating the need for someone to be sitting there and checking it every single day, right? Now that person can go focus on something that actually requires, a human being to be doing it. Whereas we can use, in this example, we can use and leverage, modern computing to be able to do something at a much faster and still really accurate rate. I believe his rate was like 97% accuracy. So he's still working at the census today on applying kind of similar models and ideas to other projects. But I think that's a really amazing illustration of the type of impact that our fellows have.
And what's really remarkable is he was a fellow. Like that could be one of you as well, like when you can do it over the summer, right? I think he was still in college, he was graduate or something.
Yeah, he had just finished grad school, Christian. But yeah, the fact that he was able to accomplish that in 10 weeks is incredible. That's like unheard of, right? I don't think I can think of a private sector internship where you'd be able to kind of touch that level of work. Another example is two fellows from 2018, R and Miriam. They worked on a really cool project at the Department of Veteran Affairs, where they helped build a tool for folks, for veterans who needed to file complaints with the department regarding their GI Bill benefits. So if you serve in the military, once you leave or once you've completed your service, you're entitled to particular benefits for veterans. And one of those is an educational benefit. So you can get free college or other forms of education for your service. And unfortunately, a lot of predatory for-profit institutions had taken advantage of kind of this benefit and weren't actually helping veterans get the education that they desired. And so this complaint tool allowed veterans to go online, fill out a really simple form, and essentially say, like, here's this predatory institution. I need help, reclaiming my GI Bill benefits, and filing that with the department. And that was a tool that they were able to work on in collaboration with the USDS team at the Department of Veteran Affairs. And the two of them were able to contribute a ton to that project. So that's another really amazing example. That process was done on paper before, which you can imagine how much time that took and how efficient that was for getting a response. So being able to digitize a process like that is also really phenomenal. And while it may seem simple, again, it affects tens of millions of people.
Yeah. And it makes it more accessible and it's overall good for everyone.
For sure.
One other question that we kind of got before is kind of about bipartisanship, nonpartisanship. So obviously, working in government is a very political area. How do you kind of maintain and make sure that the work you do doesn't get, everything's going to be politicized, but how do you kind of stay outside of the whole craziness of Congress and the White House, and how do you kind of separate it and just make sure you can keep doing good work and not get partisan?
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people realize, but the government's really supported by civil servants. People who have been in government for decades, have served under multiple administrations, and show up every day to do their work, not on behalf of a particular president or a particular politician, but really, again, in service of the American people. And so for us at Coding It Forward, we are a 501c3 nonprofit, which means the IRS basically says, we can't use our privileges as a nonprofit organization to advocate for certain political policies or politicians, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So while we stay out of the fray on the end of politics, and we're definitely a nonpartisan organization, we do recognize that, of course, all of our actions are political in some way, shape, or form. And so for the projects that we work on, at least, we really try to scope our projects with the federal agency partners we're working with to make sure that they're impactful for all Americans. And what that means is, we've worked with organizations like U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And I know that when folks hear that off the bat, they're thinking of things happening at the border and really tragic policies that our government has implemented. But what our fellows were working on was, I would say, the complete opposite of that. And instead, they were helping build applications to make it easier for refugees to apply for asylum in the United States. And so those types of projects that make it easier for Americans to receive everyday services that they need, or is the type of work that we're focused on, or work that makes it easier for civil servants to do their jobs, right? So there's some projects that we do that are internal to the agencies and help improve their technical infrastructure within the agencies as well.
Gotcha. Awesome. That's really great. And then I guess right now, especially it's a hectic time where we're changing transitions. I think this will be the first time in Coding It Forward's history when you're going between two administrations. Is there any preparation you need to make, or do you think y'all are ready to kind of transition? Or will there be any event, or will it kind of just be seamless, you think?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, there's been a lot of civil servants and who have served under multiple presidencies, and we're fortunate enough to be supported by a lot of them. So they're the ones that are doing the hard work of preparing their agencies for this next administration. On our end, we've actually already worked with our agency partners to start scoping out projects for this summer. So and again, because we work on a lot of things that aren't necessarily affected by the day-to-day policy decisions that Congress might be making, but instead are longer term kind of institutional projects, we're not as affected by the changes that are bound to happen.
Gotcha. Awesome. One last question kind of around this kind of similar area is kind of diversity in government. So people often kind of have this perception that government doesn't really represent them or what they look like or how they act, especially like there's a lot of Harvard or Ivy League kind of graduates in government. There's also traditionally more white male kind of people in government. How do you try to use Coding It Forward to kind of promote a more equitable government that kind of represents America as a whole, kind of in the service? If that, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, I would actually say that the government and the whole, at least on the top levels that you're seeing, for sure. Obviously, our current administration is very white, very male, represents a lot of elite institutions. But on the whole, again, civil servants represent, I think, the diversity of this country in a really fantastic way. But there's obviously always room for improvement, for sure. Something that Coding It Forward is committed to, particularly as a technical kind of fellowship program, is really making sure we're inclusive. I'd say the tech industry has the same problem, if not worse, in terms of inclusion, and particularly with recent events at Google and Facebook, there's a lot of work to be done there. So what we're doing to tackle that is making sure that we're building cohorts that represent the diversity of our country. So all of our fellowship cohorts have been a majority female, a majority people of color, and also come from a broad range of universities. So I believe we've had something like 90 plus institutions represented now, at least, and only a little bit over 200 fellows. So on average, that's pretty good when you think about the numbers. But those include public institutions. Obviously, we've had UC SD students, we've had UC Berkeley students, we've had people from the University of Michigan, we've had people from the University of Florida, we've had folks from all sorts of public institutions across the country, as well as, of course, private institutions, technical institutions, all that jazz. But I think the really cool part about the fellowship is that we bring people together from these really diverse backgrounds, whether that's academic, whether that's racial, ethnic, religious, gender identity, whatever it might be, and bring them together in a common goal of service.
One of the other, sorry, this is like, I'm just looking at, I have too many questions to look at. Another big kind of question you have, and this is going to kind of transition into like about the fellowship itself, is kind of like, what are some of the biggest challenges you faced while being a Civic Digital Fellow yourself? And I guess with Coding It Forward as well.
Yeah. So when I was a fellow, it was the first ever cohort that we had. So we were kind of the guinea pigs, if you will, of kind of the experiment of hosting this fellowship. So I think one of the struggles our year was that projects were not super well scoped ahead of time. The kind of expectations weren't super clear. So we spent the first few weeks trying to figure out what it was we were supposed to be doing. And that obviously got resolved, and I was able to contribute to a really awesome project to help small business owners. But I think just the adjustment of bringing in entry-level talent into government and making sure that they're kind of up to speed and able to hit the ground running day one was a challenge. We've improved tenfold since then, since we've obviously done this quite a few more times. But I think that first year it was just kind of figuring out, what does this program look like? What are we actually capable of doing, and how do we do it? Fortunately, we were successful and we were able to continue bringing on folks into agencies, but that was definitely a challenge. I think the other thing was people were just not used to the work environment of the federal government. A lot of our fellows have come from research positions in academia or previous internships at startups or private sector companies, and the government just functions differently. And so to kind of help people, like you were saying earlier, knock on doors, find people to talk to, kind of encourage them to get out of their comfort zones was also, I think, a big learning lesson, because I think a lot of folks in technical internships are used to just being able to sit at their desk, have their manager assign them, a technical problem to solve. They do it, great, on to the next one, right? Whereas in the fellowship, there's definitely a lot more ambiguity and problem solving and initiative that our fellows have to take in order to solve challenges.
Definitely.
I think in terms of growing coding it forward, oh goodness, I could talk for the next week about this, but I'll keep it short. We're a really small team. I don't think most people realize that. We're only 3 full-time individuals, and I was actually the only full-time employee before this June. So being a really small team faced with serving a lot of people is always a challenge, just in terms of managing our time and using it wisely and making sure that we're moving efficiently and getting back to the people we need to. But it's also been a really big blessing, I think, because our team is super mission aligned. We're very close. We work super well together, and we're able to get things done really fast. Even though we're a nonprofit, even though we work with government, we're able to move nimbly and get things done. We've also scaled a ton as an organization in the past few years. As I mentioned, we started with 14 fellows. We've now had over 200. So there's been a lot of lessons that have come from that, just in terms of, how do we help manage students? How do we provide support for them and make sure that they feel supported by our team? How do we plan events? How do we make sure they're welcome? How do we build community, and how do we build an alumni infrastructure? Those are all questions we figured out as we've kind of gone along. And fortunately, our students have been really willing to help grow the organization with us. And we've been able to get to this point where I'm really proud of the product we've created together, but definitely a lot of growing points and figuring things out along the way.
Especially with so many part-time employees and so many fellows now who are also, I guess, technically part-time members of that. How do you kind of keep the culture that kind of started with you and Chris and that original idea? How do you maintain that culture, especially this? Because I as a full disclaimer, I'm part of the fellowship, I'm part of the community. I can still feel there's that culture there. How do you, I guess, make sure that culture doesn't kind of die out?
Yeah, I think it's really listening to the people that we serve and work with. We're always seeking feedback from our community, whether that's current fellows or alumni. I know you've filled out many of our surveys, but seeking out that information and figuring out how we can best serve people has always kind of been at the core of what we do, especially as a nonprofit organization. That's the whole point of our existence. So even continuing that to this day. And even though you completed the fellowship 2 years ago, still, seeking out answers from folks like you who have that experience. What went well? What didn't go well? How can we be improving? What do you want to see as an alum? And continuing to listen has been a big part, I think, of our culture, and to be able to foster a really inclusive and tight-knit community, because we're working on things that people actually want to see from us, and we're not just throwing things at everyone and hoping they stick. In terms of our day-to-day operations, I mean, I'm very fortunate to still get to work with Chris, and then we've also brought on Ariana, who's with our team for 2 years on a part-time basis before she graduated this spring. And the 3 of us all have different stories, obviously, but we really share a common commitment to public service and to bringing in more people and making it an inclusive organization. So I think having kind of that shared mission, shared alignment, shared purpose and goals has been really helpful for our team, and to have kind of that North Star, if you will, is what guides us on a day-to-day basis.
That's awesome. How much of, I guess, the culture or like who you are yourself, do you think was shaped kind of by your college experience, and like what takeaways kind of do you have what you spent in time in college? What takeaways do you have from that do you think it still drives with you today?
Yeah, I mean, I think not being willing to just jump in and figure things out has been a big lesson. I knew nothing about government contracting before doing this job. I didn't really know much about running a nonprofit. I didn't really know anything about running a fellowship program, but I knew that I could figure it out because I had a lot of amazing people who were supportive of our ideas and that I could rely on and ask questions. And so I think bringing that attitude every day of not saying, oh, I can't do this, I don't know where to start, I'm so overwhelmed, and instead saying, okay, I have an idea. I've done an internship before. What did that look like? What did I like? What did I not like? Okay, let me talk to some of my friends. Let me talk to people in our network, and just slowly but surely figure it out. Has been, I think, a really big part of our journey. We started as a small team. We're still a small team. We started as a super tiny community. I think we we're like 200 people in a Facebook group, maybe. And today we're like over 3,000. And that's just Facebook alone. That's not even all the stuff we've done. But just finding other people to talk to and rely on, and figure out how do we continue to build this in a way that actually serves the people we're trying to serve has been a big part of kind of my strategy as a leader, and my philosophy. I think in terms of kind of my journey from what I thought I was going to do in college to now, I had no idea what I was doing in college, frankly. I'm sure all of you have had those moments too. And there were some times when I was just like, my career is over before it's even begun, which is not even true, but you sometimes feel that way when you're a student and you don't know what's next. And you maybe didn't get an internship you wanted, or don't know where you're going to end up next summer. And that's kind of where I was at my junior-ish year of college. And I was just really lost. And so I stayed with Coding It Forward, but I also had the opportunity to join an organization called Venture for America, which is kind of like a Teach for America. It's a 2-year fellowship program where they place recent graduates in cities across the country that they've identified as kind of regions for high growth and high startup growth in particular. So I did get the opportunity to work at a small startup in Texas that was technology focused. And from that experience, I realized like, hey, I'm capable of doing Coding It Forward full time. I have the skills. I think I can figure it out. If I'm looking at so many entrepreneurs around me, so many people in Venture for America who wanted to become entrepreneurs and are now small business owners from my original class, and realized like, hey, sometimes you just have to take that leap of faith and do it along the way. And so about 5 months into my Venture for America fellowship, I resigned from my position. I decided to make the leap of faith and take Coding It Forward full time. Had no schedule, had no one to tell me what to do every day. I really just had to get up every single morning and decide I'm going to move this organization forward somehow. I'm going to grow it. I'm going to continue. And that's what I did. So I think it takes a lot of self-motivation. I had a lot of friends who said, I could never do that. I need someone to say, you're working 9 to 5 today, whatever. And so I think that is something to be mindful of, that entrepreneurship is not always like, hey, let's come with these fun, cool ideas and, whatever. Like there's a lot of dedication and regularity that goes into making it a real job and to making it a functional organization, that sometimes you just gotta set your schedules and set your boundaries and make sure that you're following those too.
Well, I think it was really great. I'm going to take the rest of this time to kind of talk more about the fellowship itself, like I guess the crown jewel of Coding It Forward. I guess, can we just start off by saying like, we keep mentioning the fellowship and what is it, and what can anyone apply? A lot of the students here are looking for internships for this summer. Most of I think our audience is kind of currently in college. There might be freshmen, sophomores, and juniors.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for sure. So the fellowship it's called the Civic Digital Fellowship, first of all, not just the fellowship. So the Civic Digital Fellowship is a 10-week long internship opportunity for technical students. We define that as anyone interested in software engineering, data science, product management, or design, where we place these students in federal agencies to work on different innovation challenges. So over the course of 10 weeks, you get assigned to an agency project, you get to help implement it and work with a team to do so, but you also get a ton of support from our community. I know we've talked about kind of our community at length a little bit, but where you work alongside other students as well, and also get to participate in a lot of experiential learning. So we do things like site visits where we go and visit different tech companies and civic organizations. Typically in Washington, D.C., due to the pandemic, we've moved a lot of that to Zoom, but still engaging with a lot of different leaders in the space and figuring out what kind of opportunities are out there. You also receive one-on-one mentorship from an assigned mentor and get to learn from them and their career journeys and experiences. And then also, what was I going to say? You also get to participate in art programming. So we do a lot of fun opportunities. Because of the pandemic, it's been a lot of like Zoom game nights. We've done trivia nights, all sorts of different stuff. But in person, we tried to host a lot of fun opportunities as well for folks. So that's kind of the fellowship in a nutshell. Definitely check out the links that the team is dropping in the chat because that goes into it in a lot more detail. But that's kind of the 1 minute pitch.
nice. Also, to anyone who's watching, if you have any questions, feel free to submit the questions. This is your time as well as much as ours. I'll talk a little bit about it as well, just to pitch a little bit. I will say the site visits that Coding It Forward organizes has been really cool. I'm not sure what they're doing kind of in the remote world, but when I was there in person, I think one of the coolest things is we got to visit the ambassador of Estonia, which was very fun. We got to just, for those of you who know, Estonia is actually this really cool, very techy kind of country. They do a lot of cool things. And I think the coolest part of the whole thing is I was wearing like jeans even though I wasn't supposed to. So I was just dressed very casually in this room of all these like really everyone looked really fancy and formal. And I was just kind of in the room and I was welcome there just as much as everyone else because one thing that I thought was really interesting is that everyone there is kind of excited to have you there. They're excited to see technologists in government because it's not as prevalent as it should be. And so I will say, like, I've never felt more welcome kind of in rooms like, wow, I'm like, they kind of want to hear from me. They kind of want me here in that sense. That was definitely a really cool thing. I guess, Rachel, my question is like, now in this remote kind of world, how do you, are the site visits still happening? How are they happening are they happening over Zoom? How is that working?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of it over Zoom. So instead of site visits, they've kind of become small conversations. So we try and limit kind of our attendance in Zoom. So for instance, we had like over 60 fellows this past summer. And I recognize that being on a Zoom with 60 people is not really engaging. And you don't really get an opportunity to interact a lot with our speakers. So we really try and limit kind of the number of attendees at every Zoom, put a lot of questions for the folks we're engaging with, and really give students the opportunity to engage with some amazing leaders, not necessarily one-on-one, but in a small group setting. So it's been a big part of the fellowship still. It's something that we offer several times a week to our fellows. And I think has still been a really transformative experience, even though, unfortunately, we're not able to go into the cool buildings and places that we were able to go to in DC. We still get a lot of exposure to the folks that make it happen.
Awesome. Okay. Oh, I see Q&A. What do you recommend people get started in approaching civic entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first would be identifying a problem that you're trying to solve. I mean, I think that's true of any entrepreneur, but sometimes I think folks are misled to just want to be an entrepreneur and not necessarily know what they're doing or what their purpose is. So I would look at different things, different problem spaces that you're interested in. see what institutions are already doing something about it. Are there people already trying to solve that problem? Is there necessarily a technical solution that needs to be there, or is that something that would be a nice to have? I think it's important to remember in this space that there's a lot of people already doing the work. Sometimes our institutions are not really efficient, or perhaps don't have the proper support they need to be as effective as possible, but really investigating your problem space, understanding the players who are already in it, and figuring out how technology can perhaps assist them, and not necessarily replace the efforts that exist, or be a one-stop solution, I should say.
Oh, we have another question. What are some examples of projects participants have worked on in the past? So I guess in addition to like the one that Christian did, I guess what are some other projects participants have worked on?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton. We've had over 200 fellows. What I would actually recommend, instead of me trying to cover the breadth of them, is to go to our GitHub. It's github.com/codingitforward. All of the past projects and presentations are on there. So that's what I would actually recommend checking out, just because there are so many of them that's probably your best bet in terms of seeing kind of the types of work our students do.
Yeah, I'm putting that in the chat now. Cool. So I think that might be it in terms of questions and stuff. I guess just to end it off, I guess, do you have any last minute words of advice for all of us who are in college right now, kind of looking out what our options should be? Say we are all applying to coding at Ford, not all of us get in. I guess what should we do? Is it like, is our civic tech journey over if we can't get into this fellowship? What else can we do in that kind of?
Well, I'll definitely say it's not over. Coding It Forward is not the be all end all. There are tons of amazing organizations and opportunities that are out there. Obviously, I hope you'll consider applying to the Civic Digital Fellowship, but in the case that you don't get in, or you're not particularly interested in our program, I actually recommend checking out our newsletter. I don't mean to say that as like a self-promotion plug, but we actually publish a newsletter every 2 weeks. And I'll drop the link in the chat in a minute, but it includes all sorts of job and internship resources that fall under the civic tech and social impact space. So would definitely recommend subscribing to that. Even if you're not actively job searching, I think it's a really informative way to discover companies that are out there, to discover potential roles that are out there. We also include relevant news articles and online events that are happening in the space. So I think that's a really great resource. We cater it to specifically entry-level folks such as yourself. So definitely would check that out. Again, perfect. Already, I think you might have put it only to panelists.
Oh, wait, whoops.
But yeah, Ronak's dropping the link in the chat right now. But that's a great place to check out. I'd also say there's some other job boards. There's Tech Jobs for Good, Tech Jobs for Good. Design Gigs for Good is another one. There's lots of resources out there. Also try and get involved either on campus or with other student-based orgs. Hack for Impact is really popular. Design for America is another great one. Impact Labs is another similar organization. There's lots of organizations that are really dedicated to this space, and there seems to be a continuous trend of more and more popping up. So would definitely recommend checking out some of those orgs. And then also, don't be afraid to take a private sector opportunity, even if it's not necessarily aligned with your long-term career goals. A lot of people who come into government work come from the private sector and have that experience. It can be a great learning opportunity. It can be a great way to develop your technical skills. So definitely don't be afraid of accepting it, even if it's not your dream job or your ultimate goal. Things change. What I was doing in college just a few years ago is not at all what I'm doing today. So it's okay if your 5-year trajectory is not a perfect line. And I think that's something that I certainly realized in the past few years, is that it's okay to jump from point A to point B and have it be a little wiggly and weird along the way, and not always have kind of a perfect, linear path. And then finally, I think kind of the last thing I would say is if you get rejected from the fellowship, you can always apply again. We've had tons of folks who have applied a second or third time, and maybe the first time you just didn't fit a good project or didn't have the right skill set or whatever it might be, and we've accepted folks who have applied again. So definitely don't be afraid to do that. In the case that you've already been rejected in the past, or if that happens in the future.
And I'll also just once again promote that newsletter. I've used that a lot. You can actually get a lot of internship opportunities on it. So like for those of you who's looking for internships, I've noticed that as far as my experience, civic tech internships are a lot more fun to interview for. They generally ask more fun questions. It's not just like the lead code style hardcore questions. It's more kind of culture kind of fun questions in my experience. And then there's definitely a really strong emergence of companies that are kind of playing the role in both sides. Like they're kind of called B Corps or just like ethical companies in that sense. So yeah, definitely take a look at those places. There's one last Q&A. Beyond organizational challenges CIF has faced, what are some of the personal challenges you faced during your time and how have you pushed on past them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Kind of as I alluded to earlier, I mean, I was the only full-time employee of Coding It Forward for a year and a half. So I worked alone. And now that seems pretty normal to be working from home and in your own space, but that was definitely a really big adjustment for me. I went from graduating college to working for a small startup that had about a team of 10 or so individuals, but had a lot of other folks involved in the organization that I was seeing every single day, to then going out on my own to do this. And that was a really scary first step. But again, like I said, doing things like setting a schedule, just kind of having, I don't like the word discipline because I think it kind of infers that like you should be negative towards yourself, but instead just setting a schedule, having goals for the day, remembering that like it's okay if not everything gets done in one day, right? And just taking things step by step. And also surrounding yourself with people who are supportive. I think that was the biggest thing for me, especially working alone, even though we obviously had our part-time team members, making sure I had friends I could talk to, making sure I had people I could reach out to for advice. So making sure that you have a support system, whether that's family, friends, professional connections, school connections, whatever it might be, people you can talk to about whatever you might be struggling with on a day-to-day basis. And keep going. Sometimes stuff is hard. I mean, we're living in a global pandemic right now. It's okay if things go south or don't end up the way you expect them to. It's an opportunity to innovate and to take a different approach and figure things out in a different way. So Coding It Forward has launched programs in the past that weren't super successful and we shut them down. It's okay. It happened. We learned from it. We started a new program. So there are always ways to kind of get around troubles and to figure things out. So definitely keep that in mind. I think having a positive mentality is a big part of it for sure, to stay motivated and to assure yourself that you're capable of what you're trying to accomplish as well.
Oh, thank you so much for kind of coming here. It was really great to talk to you and really hear about fellowship, about Coding It Forward, about your own personal journey. And we just got a question. Somewhat unrelated, Coding It Forward spans across multiple federal agencies and is still growing despite a very recent, despite being very new. Could you share about the process towards selecting and reaching out towards different agencies to integrate into the program? So I guess like how do you
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So we have been fortunate that the program kind of spread word of mouth at first. So after that first summer at the Census Bureau, other agencies kind of heard about us, or folks or agencies that worked in collaboration with the census heard about us. So that was a really amazing opportunity to get exposure to other federal agency partners. We also do a lot of work with agency teams that have gotten or have started a particular innovation focus in the past few years. So teams that have had people from the Presidential Innovation Fellowship, or teams that have had people from the U.S. Digital Service. Those have really great alignment with us because obviously they're already focused on bringing modern technology into their agencies or continuing to build upon already pre-existing work. It really just kind of depends on the agencies and the projects. We have a lot of conversations with agencies every week. Some of them pan out, some of them don't. It's not necessarily a sign of the agency when things go poorly. It doesn't mean we disagree with their work. Sometimes it's just a funding issue or a contracting issue or something that's kind of out of our control at that particular time. So in terms of who gets a fellow which summer, just kind of depends on, things like budget availability, things like project availability. Are there people who can manage and mentor our fellows at that agency? So it really just depends on a year-to-year basis in terms of how things are shaking out. But yeah, a lot of it's networking, a lot of it's word of mouth, a lot of it's reaching out to contacts or asking our existing mentors and hosts if they have colleagues at other agencies that might be interested in the program. So kind of using all of the resources we have available to find new leads.
It is around 3 o'clock now, so I want to respect your time. Thank you for coming on. For those of you who are still here, we'll be doing a post-event discussion in the Innovate Discord. Praneet will drop a link to that in the chat. Thank you so much for coming. It was really great hearing from you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And if folks have any questions or concerns, definitely recommend checking out our website, checking out our newsletter, and also in particular, if you have questions about the fellowship, our team can be reached at recruiting@codingitforward.com. So if there's anything that's not addressed on our website, definitely feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to help. Awesome. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
All right. So yeah, we'll be on Discord for a post-event discussion, just talking about some stuff.